Sure.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Charles Shapiro, the President of World Affairs Council. Welcome to our Zoom program, a conversation with Ambassador Stavros Lambrinidis. This program is brought to you in part by the UPS Foundation and by the Atlanta Global Studies Center. May 9th is Europe Day. Europe Day this year celebrates the 70th anniversary of the Schuman Declaration, made by the then Foreign Minister of France, which sort of set the course, which led to the European Union. To help us celebrate the EU, our guest today is Ambassador Stavros Lambrinidis, who has been the EU ambassador to the United States for the past 15 months. He's a former foreign minister of Greece, a former member of the European Parliament, a graduate of Amherst College and Yale Law School, practiced law in the United States for 5 years before returning home. So it's a pleasure to have you. Just a quick administrative note. For everybody in the audience, please, we welcome your questions, but send them via the chat function on Zoom, which if you've never done this before, if you go to move your cursor to the bottom of the screen, you'll see chat. And send the questions to Fernanda Lucchine, our executive director, who will edit them, combine some of the questions, and send them to me so that I can ask Ambassador Lambrinidis. Pardon me, I apologize. I've been practicing all week. At the end of the program, we have a message from Dr. Heike Fuller, the Consul General of Germany in the Southeastern United States. So welcome, Mr. Ambassador. Let me start off. We're in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. The EU as an institution has been criticized for being late in responding. But with the EU, you're talking about 27 sovereign independent nations, each with their own Minister of Health. So what is the role of Brussels? What's the role of the EU in coordinating the response to a health crisis like this?
Well, thank you, Ambassador Shapiro. Great to be with you even virtually. Thanks to the World Affairs Council for organizing this in Atlanta. And as we discussed before this began, this is, I'm not wiggling out of the obligation to, at some point soon, come down to Atlanta in person and continue this. And thank you as well to Heike Fuller, who's since January the EU local chair of the Consuls General we have in the country. All the Consuls General are doing an absolutely fantastic job, especially in these times. Health is not one of those things that the European Union member states have transferred to the European Union as a responsibility. The EU is no different really than the US in many, many things, although people need to know enough about it to understand that. We're not a federal state. But we are 27 countries that have decided to cede a big part of our sovereignty to the collective decision-making of us all, believing that actually increases every individual sovereignty, because especially in a big, complex world like this, each country alone would have much less power and ability to do things. So over the years, we've given much more to Brussels collectively, make collective decisions. But health has not been one of those things that we have given to Brussels up to now. So when the crisis hit, every one of the member states began trying to deal with it individually, trying to protect lives, trying to procure PPE equipment. And it became very quickly very clear to everyone that was not working. So everyone said, okay, we have to try to have a European response to a world crisis, not an individual member state response. And that's when the EU came in, because the member states wanted us to come in. We used instruments we had, and new instruments were created. But the response has been remarkable. We focused, first of all, on empowering our member states to take measures to protect lives and livelihoods that up to this point they didn't have the ability to do. We allowed them to give massive amounts of state aid, for example, to small and medium enterprises in their countries, something that is not allowed normally under EU law. We allowed them to be able to spend beyond the debt and deficit limits that exist in Europe. And that allowed for injections of cash of about 3% of GDP of member states right there. Mm-hmm. Then we made a decision collectively to amass about 500 billion, and by some estimates, if you put more things together, close to €1 trillion immediately, European money, to be able to support member states on the ground in this effort, and also in the effort of protecting livelihoods. So lives and livelihoods are the two big things. Just to give you a couple of examples of what we did not allow member states to fight against each other in international markets to procure PPE. We thought that was a mistake, and so we collectively procured PPE as European Union on behalf of our member states. And that allowed us to have a huge procurement with the European Union power behind it, giving suppliers around the world the certitude of a big order, and also reducing prices as much as possible because of that. The second thing we did, among the many things we did, is we procured financially 100 billion from markets around the world under the European umbrella to be able to support employment in the European Union member states. And that's a very, very interesting thing, because it's a little different than what happened in the US. So if you look at the EU packages of response and the US packages, you see some things that are the same and some things that are different. In Europe, we have universal health coverage. We didn't need to give money to people to be able to afford to go be treated, take a test. In Europe, we have laws that ensure that companies can, of course, lay off people, but not lay them off at the drop of a hat. And so our emphasis was to create 100 billion to be able to support companies to keep workers in their companies, to be able to pay their salaries, so the workers did have the money to, still, go to the store, buy stuff for the, family table. And so that when, in fact, we come to the recovery phase, we are ready to kickstart our economies with people already in job. And in fact, this may be the most interesting element of this crisis. It's not a physical capital crisis. So buildings are not being destroyed. Right. Infrastructure is not being destroyed. It's a human capital crisis. So we are trying to protect human capital in Europe as much as we can, so that people that don't get laid off get an unemployment benefit, but then being able to find a new job or the old job, may take much more time than staying in the job that you have, the skills that you have. 3.4 trillion euros has been collectively the response we've given to member states up to now. And that includes about 20% of guarantees. That's another difference between the EU and the US. We've given guarantees to banks to be able to make loans to small, medium enterprises to the extent of about 2.3 trillion euros. That's not money you spend immediately, that's a guarantee. But that has allowed humongous liquidity in the EU market compared to what banks were willing to do before, which was right. Not. So we protect lives, protect livelihoods. And finally, if I may say, Ambassador Shapiro, we also, after the initial shock of this response, we also did two other things. One, we decided last week that we're going to invest massively in the recovery of our member states after the crisis. There are going to be several trillions of euros put both in an increased European budget, the money that Europe has to spend on member states, and there's going to be a special recovery fund set up. We're looking now at the mechanisms of its financing that will target both specific sectors mostly hit by this crisis and specific countries in Europe mostly hit by this crisis. So we're showing collective solidarity, which is a good thing, given the fact that May 9th is coming up, which is the 70th anniversary of the European Union. We are the biggest, freest open market in the world, the single market. It didn't just happen. The EU created it, and that is the biggest booster of prosperity, not just for Europeans, but also for Americans. But we also were built on solidarity. This is in our blood. It didn't just happen. We came out of a Second World War in which we were killing each other. The biggest crime against humanity, the Holocaust, occurred in our hands. We decided this would never happen again. Not in our hands, not on our watch as Europeans. And we built up the European Union, little by little, to be now the most prosperous and the most peaceful region in the world, and also the biggest economic, trade, investment, and values partner that the US has. And this kind of partnership, this kind of cooperation is what I talk to my American interlocutors here in Washington daily about. This is not just about this crisis, this is about how the world develops after it. And we should have a collective say, a joint say in this. We should identify things to work together on, and we should move to it. Enough talking, as it were.
That's great. That's a terrific introduction. So if health is the responsibility of the member states, not of Brussels, as countries are reopening their economies, and you see on the news, Germany's doing this, Spain's doing that, little by little. Is there guidance coming out of Brussels, or that's each country is deciding on its own what to do?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Yes, guidance came out of Brussels last week or 2 weeks ago. It's guidance, it's not mandatory, but we are very much encouraging our member states to follow it because indeed a coordinated exit from this crisis is as important as a coordinated response to it was. There are many reasons for that. One is that we have the Schengen area. One of the biggest achievements of the EU is that we abolished internal borders. People can just jump on a bus, on a train, on a plane, and fly anywhere in the European Union.
But some of those were closed as a result of
exactly,
it. Are they back open again?
And some of them are closed. But the opening, therefore, has to happen in a coordinated way. Right. You cannot just say, well, I am opening my country and opening my border if the other country next door is not ready to do so. So it's quite important for that to happen. And it's very important as well for supply chains. So you have many companies located in one European country that produce things that use parts that come from other European Union member states. If you open up that factory, but the other countries have not opened up, then it doesn't do you much good. And that kind of coordination now is taking place as well. So it's not going to be a perfectly choreographed ballet, but that's what we're doing. And once we open up internally, and we will, and the Schengen area is entirely established, then we will also begin opening up our external borders, which we closed a couple of months ago to ensure that not more virus could come into Europe, but also that we would not export the virus to other people.
My last question on the health side of this, and I apologize for staying on this so long, is some of the countries were hit much worse than others. What sort of assistance of a health nature did the countries less affected reach out and help those that were more affected? In the U.S. news, certainly Italy, Spain, and France appear to have been those in the worst circumstances.
Yeah. So you take Italy, which is by far the most hard hit of countries. A number of European member states weeks ago, Germany, Austria, France, others, provided Italy with millions of masks, equipment, PPE, generally speaking. Although they were also going through their own, climbing up the peak. The doctors have flown into Italy from Romania, other countries, to support doctors on the ground. There are patients from France that have been treated in German hospitals close to the border. Patients from Italy as well taken to hospitals in different EU member states when the Italian hospitals in the region could not do it. So at the beginning, that was not the case, right? So at the beginning, if you followed the first week or two, when everyone was trying to basically secure whatever they could in the crisis for their own country, there were stories about, European member states hoarding equipment. And this is precisely why all our member states very quickly realized that this was not the way to go, and we moved to the collective response. And then, of course, there are a lot of equipment, ventilators, other things that have gone to Italy, Spain, France, other countries from the EU rescue mechanism. So that's if you like, a repository of all these things that we have in the EU as an emergency mechanism, and we can send them out to people in the EU in need. But Ambassador Shapiro, let me just say, because this is very important, we have not forgotten the rest of the world in the same way that we did not forget supporting each other in this. And that is not a small thing, that's a big thing. There are countries right now around the world going around acting like Mother Teresa's, pretending that they are, saving other countries. And in fact, other countries are in real need. We have been supporting organizations, multilateral ones, such as the World Health Organization, which is on the ground, on the front lines in over 60, 70 of the poorest countries in the world, as we speak, trying to contain the virus and to save people's lives in places where there's virtually no health infrastructure to speak of. But we also dedicated 20 billion euros, which is a huge amount of money, for immediate support to those countries, directly ourselves, both to the health systems, but also to the livelihoods. Because many countries around the world right now are very fragile. They don't just need masks. Sure. They need social stability. They need a sense of economic continuity, even as they're being hit very hard. And they need to see the European Union and the United States not simply focusing internally and selfishly on how to, do whatever it is that we need to do for our people, right? But they need to feel what they have felt for decades up to now, which is that we are not the selfish powers in the world. We are the biggest humanitarian development aid donors in the world. We are out there supporting people. And if you want to deal with disinformation, the best way to do it is to be out there doing the right thing. And we're doing the right thing. And we are also trying to coordinate better with our American friends of this. Yesterday, or May 4th, is that yesterday or 2 days ago? Days of blurring.
Today's the 6th.
It's just when you don't move around, who cares? So on Monday we had, we hosted in Brussels, together with many countries, Germany, France, Norway, the UK, Saudi Arabia, and the UN, the Gates Foundation, many others, a huge fundraiser to collect $8 billion, that was the goal, to fund the big international organizations who today do vaccine development, right, and who do medicine development for this. We got in one day all the money that we asked for from 6 governments. Unfortunately, the US was not able to join in that effort because there is this discussion about the WHO here, and they don't. Some people don't want to be around things the WHO is around. Frankly, we feel that this is a time that a global crisis requires a global response. There certainly may be a time, and there should be a time, that we look at what we all did, the good things, the bad things, to learn for the next crisis. But in our view, the time now is to join hands, not to point fingers.
What kind of recovery do you see? Economic recovery in Europe? I mean, is it going to be by January 1? Will everything be fine again? Everybody be back at work and trade will be flowing normally? How do you see this? How long is this going to last? And what is the EU as the EU and as the member nations, what are they doing to mitigate the recovery?
Well, all the information we have right now about the EU and the US economy is that they are dramatically hit by this. We expect around 7.5% reduction of European GDP by the end of the year, about 6.5% maybe reduction in US GDP. I mean, it depends on many things, these numbers, so one has to be careful. But the fact of the matter is that the EU is more open to world trade than the US, and if you look at supply chains and things like that, you will see that their vulnerability becomes more of an EU vulnerability than a US vulnerability. But both economies are going to hit very hard. Now, we were hit earlier because, of course, the virus hit us a few weeks before it hit the US.
Right.
So if you look at the second quarter, if you look at first quarter statistics, we were very hit. Second quarter, very hit as well. The US first quarter was better. Probably second quarter is going to be pretty bad. Right. Our hope is both for the US economy and for the EU economy that in the third quarter we'll be able to come out. But we do not foresee that the economy or the GDP will be back in place until after 2021. So even by the end of 2021, we are forecasting maybe a 2% lower GDP in Europe than was the case in late 2019, early 2020 when the virus hit. Like I said, that is not just because how we will be opening, but also because of the supply chains and how others will be able to open as well.
I saw you on PBS where you talked about a Marshall Plan. Can you talk about that for a few minutes? What does that mean? What do you envision? Is that within Europe, for Europe? That's Europe reaching out, as you said, to countries in the developing world that depend on you? Or what do you see as that?
So that's something we refer about is the recovery plan for Europe. So that's an EU plan for European Union recovery. European Union recovery is an economic engine for the world. So European Union recovery is not just a European recovery. If we are able to reach a high level of consumer spending again and production, that is going to be extremely beneficial for many, many countries around the world, fundamentally for the US. And the US recovery is going to be supremely beneficial for us in Europe.
Of course.
And that's because the two of us are the main economic trade artery of the world today. We represent close to 50% of the world's GDP, close to a third of the world's trade flows. If you just take Georgia, the European Union is the biggest export market for Georgian goods today. The European Union investment in Georgia today and European trade in Georgia trade to the EU collectively create about 190,000 jobs just in Georgia. And of course, companies investing in Europe are creating jobs in Europe, American companies. So our recovery and your recovery are entirely interlinked. And certainly our recovery is interlinked with helping other countries around the world at the same time. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be investing tremendously in supporting our companies in coming out of this. But our focus will be also on moving towards a, if you like, environmentally sustainable transition of the European economy and towards a major emphasis on the digital part of the European economy, right? So we determined a few weeks back, after the European elections back in May 2019, but then the new commission came in December, that green growth would be the new growth strategy of the European Union. The European Investment Bank already has committed €1 trillion for the next 9 years just to invest on innovation, research, production of sustainable energy technologies, doing all these things. This crisis, the environmental crisis, is not going away because of COVID. The climate change is a real and present danger, and it will remain so. So we determined as Europe that we're going to be investing massively to ensure that our economies moved in that direction. And by being the first to do so in many areas, we may also have a competitive advantage, of course, in many of these technologies. We already do in a number of the green technologies. Now, we've been talking to the US about this a lot. The US, we hope, can be a leader of this transition as well. It's a very difficult discussion now because, of course, oil prices have plummeted because of the COVID crisis. And there's a very big emphasis in the US, certainly in other parts of the world, in Europe as well, on how to ensure that we have the energy diversification that we need to kickstart our economies. But green is going to be a big emphasis of ours as we move forward. You know, many people at the time that we announced this said, oh, you know, is this being once again a European kumbaya thing? My God, you know, they're the Europeans just doing the thing again. And you know what? Here's the thing. You take the European Investment Bank. I remember it well because I was Greek foreign minister during the financial crisis in 2011 and followed before and thereafter. It is probably the biggest investment bank in the world, I think, much bigger than the World Bank in terms of funding and capacity. And it is extremely concerned and extremely protective of its AAA rating. So even during the financial crisis, there were many calls to, you know, to try to give money and loans real fast to countries particularly hit. And it was always a big discussion because we were very protective. Now, either everyone on the European Investment Board got crazy one day and said, hey, we'll just throw $1 trillion and more to green growth and we'll just lose it all and lose a AAA rating, or Europe understands something that is very important for everyone to understand, that the transition, especially if the growth is focused on the green economy as well, will be very profitable and will create a huge amount of jobs from the future. Let me close this answer by saying this. At the time that we are focusing on that, we have also set up a huge fund to help communities around Europe for energy transition. It is a big mistake to assume that you can just have that transition and not care about the hundreds of thousands of people working coal and oil and other things today and just let them fall by the sidelines. If you're going to allow the markets to just deal with this, you're going to have another social crisis in your hands. So we are very hard-headed and very realistic in how we're trying to achieve this. And I think we're going to be successful. And that's what a lot of the funds that I described now, that Marshall Fund, will also be funding after we get out of this crisis.
That's great. One more question before we go to questions from the audience. And again, audience, please send your questions by chat to Fernanda Lucchine. And I see a bunch of them she's sending them to me. So we're gonna need short questions, short answers. But
the short answers is hard. Short questions.
Yeah, it is. I've been in your position.
I'll be better. I'll be better.
I know what ambassadors I know love long answers.
Yes.
So Hungary and Poland have been criticized for using the pandemic to restrict democracy in their countries. And they're not the only one. But they're the two standout EU members who've been restricting democratic freedoms. The EU has not responded very forcefully. Can you respond to that?
Well, I don't exactly agree that we have not responded very forcefully. I would say, even if you look at the European Commission President's statement, she has expressed openly concern about measures in Hungary or Poland. But what we've said is that it's not just two member states. Many of our European member states today have taken extraordinary measures. And so what the European Commission will be doing is focusing very specifically on how those measures are applied. In the past, we have initiated procedures under the EU treaties against the countries that either the Commission or the European Parliament felt were violating fundamental rights as protected in the treaties. And we will not be shy to do so again if this is determined. The democracy question is a bigger one, Ambassador Shapiro, and it's a very important one, however, and it affects us all. If you look at the discussion sometimes in the United States about how the US democratic system works, if you read opinions back and forth, if you look at the strong opinions held from different sides, you could, as an outsider, sit back and say, oh my God, look, the US is collapsing. It's not working. If you sit from the outside and look at Europe, you could, as people have done in virtually every crisis we've had in the past 10 years, the financial one, the immigration one, Brexit, the corona, you could sit back and say, look, Europe is collapsing as well. Europe is not collapsing. Europe is a huge, strong, powerful democracy, and it will remain so. And we will address, as we have in the past, any challenges in the way that we have as Europe over many decades to correct them. So keep in mind that when you take a country like China, which today is using, as we also concluded in a public report we put out on disinformation from the EU, is conducting together with Russia and some other countries very concerted disinformation campaigns and using narratives. You look at what they say, fundamentally they're trying to say that the West is selfish, divided, ineffective in dealing with a crisis like this, and frankly also fighting with each other on everything. The democracy is not working. The Americans are fighting with the Europeans on this, on that, on the other. Why would you want to go there? Our system is better. Authoritarian systems are better. Well, no, they're not. But one thing that we can make sure in the immediate aftermath of this is that we absolutely do not fall into the trap of, through our words or our actions, confirming that. So we have to be very vigilant in ensuring that our democracies and our democratic systems are really function well and are protected. And we have to be very vigilant in ensuring that Americans and Europeans, from anything from how trade will go in the future and our cooperation on trade, to artificial intelligence, where will it go? Someone is setting the standards today. Unless democracies work together to set those standards, others who are using AI to look at your face and try to figure out what your political belief is are going to be setting those standards for other countries around the world.
Right.
So we have a major responsibility here and a major opportunity, and that is what we should be grabbing onto, and that's what I hope we will.
That's a great message for EU Day, by the way.
Yeah.
That is terrific. So here's some questions. This from Edward Shartar. These are from people who are on the call. Is the EU preparing for a Europe without NATO?
No, no, we're not. NATO is even in our treaties. NATO is the primary European organization, defense umbrella, and the vast majority of EU member states are members of NATO. But what we are preparing and wish for is for a much closer EU-NATO cooperation, as we in the European Union are also taking greater responsibility for our own defense. So we have put in place in the past couple of years major European coordination defense initiatives to ensure that we can research more together on defense, produce more together, and deploy more together. And because indeed in Europe we don't have a different Greek army for NATO and a different Greek army for Greece,
right,
or that applies for any other country, the stronger our militaries are, the more efficient they are, the stronger the NATO militaries are as well. So this is something that we hope to be able to achieve both internally in terms of better cooperation and coordination, and therefore also within NATO.
That's great. Okay, here's a question from Britt von Alderen. Can you share your thoughts on the financial aid and Euro bonds and how they are influencing cooperation during this crisis?
Well, you know, whether or not you will have, in other words, how you will be able to get fresh money to fund, whether the recovery fund or, you know, member states in need or whatever, is a discussion that has been very divisive in Europe in the past few years. There are countries that believe that you know, European debt should not be you know, collectively put together, so that they don't have to guarantee for the debt of other countries. And Eurobonds, in a sense, would be a collection of European debt under one umbrella. And others who feel that a big part of what the EU is and should be is, in fact, using its collective European firepower to be able to support different member states and different sectors of the economy as the need may be. For people to understand what this debate is about a little bit and how we are different here, Europeans and Americans, you in the States have things like treasury bills.
Right.
What is a treasury bill in a sense? A treasury bill is the US government going out and borrowing money, not on the basis of the relative economic power of Iowa versus California, or of, I'm showing here my battery falling for some reason. I don't know why, but I hope it doesn't. Or any other state, but using the collective economic, you know, heavyweight power of the US. So in Europe, we don't do that now. So we don't have, let's say, an equivalent economic instrument that we can say lend to the whole of the European economy, which of course is huge, as opposed to just lend to one place or another place. So what the finance ministers decided 2 weeks ago was to empower the European Commission to come up with a proposal of how it is that we could get the financing for that recovery fund that is going to be huge and that is going to be supporting us in recovery. And these discussions are going to be happening within the European Commission and member states. The important thing is that a decision was made by all member states that a recovery fund has to be in place. And there has to be a European thinking and way to finance it. And that is very good news, not just for Europe, but also for the US, because as I said, a strong European economy coming out of this is the best news that US companies trading and investing in Europe could ever have.
You bet. Okay, we've got a whole bunch of questions, similar questions from many of the participants wanting to know about travel between the United States and Europe. What does your crystal ball look like? When are there going to be flights again? When are you able to travel?
Flights now, right? So there are some flights now. I mean, we have been engaged very actively, and I thank as well our Consul General in Atlanta also for supporting this effort in repatriating Europeans all over the U.S. To their countries in the EU and vice versa. Americans coming from Europe back to the States. But of course, no, travel is not happening. So for travel to happen, first of all, the US and US states would have to gradually come out of their own restrictions. People have to feel more comfortable actually traveling. The Europeans have to be doing the same. And then we will, obviously reach a point that it's going to be possible to have initially more cautious travel and eventually, certainly, mass travel. But my prediction is that before we have a vaccine or a treatment that can be actually used in a massive way, that we will not be traveling as we were before. That means that the airline industry, more than any other industry perhaps in Europe and the US, has been dramatically hit by this crisis. This is why I hope this may be getting into too much esoteric cuisine for some people listening, but this is why we're talking also to our U.S. friends and counterparts here about the great importance of settling the long-standing airplane dispute, Boeing versus Airbus, Airbus versus Boeing. This is a thorn in both our sides. I think we could bring a huge boost of confidence to our companies and to our markets if we manage to take the leadership and come to a mutually beneficial settlement of this.
That's great. Question from William de Betz, who's the Consul General of Belgium in Atlanta. And he says that European...
Bonjour. Or is it Flemish? I'm not sure. Which of the two should I use?
He does both.
Okay.
He's fine in both. He says EU countries realize they're highly dependent on China for medical supplies. Is there going to be an effort within Europe to try to find a fix for this overdependence on one source for medical supplies?
Well, there are other countries too. India, 80% of most of the inputs we get for producing medicines or medicines themselves come also from India. So China and India are two big countries. We certainly are looking at what the crisis revealed as weaknesses in the medical supply chains. There's no question. And we're certainly looking at diversifying supply chains geographically, making them sometimes more redundant, perhaps, if necessary. And in some instances, companies may decide that it makes more economic sense for them to produce more stuff in Europe itself. But our focus is not on that. Our focus is ensuring that we understand what broke down in supply chains now. And while making adjustments, we fundamentally focus on keeping international trade open, keeping supply chains robust, because without that, our economies will not come out of this crisis smelling good, and trying to fix those problems. So we see a great need for European sovereignty in the area of medicine, but that does not mean European autarky. It means Europe both producing internally what it must and can and makes sense, but also ensuring that we can then get from all over the world in the next crisis immediately and without the world market breaking down as did this time what we need, both us and others. So that is a challenge, but it's not insurmountable. And we're talking about it at many levels. The G20 should also seize itself of it, in my view, also soon.
Okay. A bunch of people have asked about China, and China is the source of coronavirus. And have there discussions between the United States and Europe, discussions within Europe, about repercussions? As we get more information about what's going on in China, how China handled it, and the impact that that has had on the rest of the world.
Oh, we absolutely must, have sort of a deep-seated investigation, not just on China, throughout, on how this happened, how it was handled, what was right, what was wrong in the way it was handled, and this we very much push an international discussion on this. Absolutely. We are concerned by, at this stage at least, to ensure that we get everyone on board, scientists, governments, in supporting finding the solution, because we're not out of the woods when it comes to corona. But we're absolutely not saying that we should not be able to look at what went wrong and to also have countries, governments, organizations, individuals take responsibility when we have to. It's also an individual responsibility. We have been at the European Union, even before the District of Columbia, gave the stay-at-home order. I gave a stay-at-home order to the 120 people working at the European Union Embassy here. We are very much contributing to flattening the curve. That is also an individual responsibility, but we also do focus on government responsibilities.
Sure.
As well. So yes, we should be looking at all this. The time now is to fight this, and there will be a time also to look at all this extensively.
This is from me. It strikes me that this must be a particularly challenging time to be the EU ambassador of the United States. I'm sure you weren't planning when you got ready to come here, oh yeah, there's going to be a pandemic, I've got to deal with this. But also it strikes me that our administration, the US administration, does not value multilateral institutions, whether it's the United Nations or the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization, NATO, the EU. I mean, how have you felt that personally? Are people less willing to talk to you? How have you dealt with that?
Well, you can have a big philosophical discussion about this, but it doesn't take you anywhere if you're an ambassador. So we certainly, have discussions about the importance of working together in international organizations, multilateral ones. Also because, if you leave the table, someone else takes your place.
Right.
It's not as if the organization goes away or the issues go away. What goes away is your ability to influence the decisions. And in most multilateral organizations, with all the difficulties we had in the past few decades, countries that don't necessarily share our values, becoming more active, trying to influence the agendas more, et cetera, we have been remarkably effective when working together in addressing many of these issues. I ran the human rights foreign policy of the European Union for 7 years before I took this job. And I can tell you that the Human Rights Council at the UN, et cetera, we had tough battles to give, but we won most of them. And that is where the world needs democratic, human rights-based leadership. We also work with the US to certainly to look at ways to improve those organizations and to amend them. I'm getting a very disturbing sign that the battery is going out here, and I don't know why. Sorry about this. I don't know what to do about that. So if we die, we die. But we're close to dying anyway.
We're close to the end, so keep going.
So the World Trade Organization, you have international trade. You cannot wish some of the big players away by saying, I don't like a particular organization, WTO. We have to use WTO that has been used very effectively in most cases up to now to ensure a level playing field, especially when we come out of this crisis, because we will need a referee. There are going to be countries out there that are subsidizing, as they used to before, but even more now, their companies, skewing the level playing field, not allowing for free and open trade, which is the US wish and the EU wish. So yes, the WTO needs reforms, in some instances very important ones. But we are in favor of working together to identify them, not simply, and avoiding the danger of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, if you like. So these are the kinds of discussions that I'm having. Yes, they're not always easy ones. Yes, we don't always see eye to eye, but we are always very constructive in trying to find the way forward, because it is in the United States' interest and the European Union interest, not just one or the others, to be able to move in that direction.
That's great. Ambassador Stavros Lambrinidis, thank you so much. This has been great. This has been a great 45 minutes. I've enjoyed talking with you.
Ambassador, it's a real pleasure. Hope to see you up close soon. We didn't talk about Venezuela and Cuba and all those places that you know so well, but maybe some other time.
Well, we'll schedule you again. We'll count on you in a couple of months and we can have a much broader conversation. Thank you. This has been great. I've enjoyed it thoroughly. And I have to say, I particularly like your reference to countries going around like Mother Teresa. That's terrific. Good. We're going to, right now, Heike Fuller, Dr. Heike Fuller, who's the Consul General of Germany in the in Atlanta in the southeastern United States, is going to come on for a second and invite you all to participate in a program tomorrow, a webinar about the European Union and the southeastern US. So Heike, if you're there, please come on. And Ambassador Lambrinidis, I invite you to stay on.
Yes, Charles.
You're there. Good.
Yes, great. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We can see you as well.
Great, Charles. Thank you very much for the opportunity during my time as EU local chair here in Atlanta. Ambassador Lambrinidis, a warm welcome to the southeast of the United States.
Thank you.
5 colleagues from Belgium, France, Greece, Ireland, and the Netherlands. We all have joined this event and followed your very interesting assessment in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. It is hard to believe how much and how dramatically the world has changed, not only in Europe, but also here in Georgia and the southeast of the United States. While the virus hit us hard and our respective economies on both sides of the Atlantic, we have to fight back together just as hard to emerge out of this crisis stronger together than before. In these truly extraordinary circumstances, the 6 consul generals of the EU are very proud to represent the EU in this region. We have also joined forces with the Chambers of Commerce in Atlanta, and together we would cordially invite you to join us tomorrow at 10 o'clock at the webinar discussion on strengthening EU and US trade relations and investments amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. The outbreak of the pandemic is a crisis without borders. The associated economic emergency will not only resolve, hello?
Yeah, you're there, keep going.
Okay, because I'm gone here somehow. The outbreak of the coronavirus is a crisis without borders. The associated emergency will not be resolved by putting more barriers between us. We are really looking forward to interesting discussion tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock in our webinar. Please join us, and thank you very much again. Back to you, Charles. Hello? Herr Wünsch?
I think Charles is somewhere there. I'm still here.
Oh,
and
I'm sorry. Yeah, hello.
You're back.
Wonderful job that you're doing and the consuls general are doing. We're very, very proud to be represented collectively. I mean, of course, you all represent your countries first and foremost, and you do so very effectively. But through our EU local networks around the country, we also are very proud to be able to be represented as the EU itself. So great to see you, and thank you for those initiatives you're taking. Tomorrow is going to be a great webinar. I'm guessing, I don't know. I'm guessing we'll get quite deeply into the economic ties and relationships between the EU and Georgia. And I see that our trade counselor from the EU embassy here in Washington participates as well.
That's correct.
So you're gonna have a great time. Anyone listening, please go and register now.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you, everybody. Heike, thank you so much. This has been great. Ambassador Lambrinidis, thank you. This has been terrific. I look forward to seeing many of you tomorrow on the call at 10. We've got a program tomorrow at noon that I want to invite you to join as well. It's with Meg DePalma, who's the Regional Vice President with Prudential Financial. She's going to discuss why financial planning is different for women, so please join us tomorrow. On Friday, we've got Dennis Lockhart, the former CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, now a professor at Georgia Tech, who's going to talk about the future of the pandemic economy. On May 28th, we've got Stacey Abrams. We're negotiating with Governor Brian Kemp's staff to find a date for him. So please stick with us. If any of you are interested in sponsoring one of our Zoom programs, please contact me. We'd be delighted to have you. Thank you very much. Thanks again. I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon.